Hey guys, what's going on? Today's video is going to be going over Valkyr and her Exalted Claws. Valkyr's a warframe that can tackle almost any content in the game while remaining immune to damage, making her a strong choice for most situations. For this video, I'm going to be giving an overview of her abilities, going over two different modding setups, and then showing some gameplay and giving my thoughts about the builds. As usual, I'll have timestamps in the description so you guys can navigate to whatever part of the video you're most interested in. But let's start out by talking about her abilities. Valkyr's one, Rip Line, is probably her least useful ability. This ability essentially acts as a grappling hook and allows her to both attach to objects and grapple on to nearby enemies. This is the closest you're ever going to be to being Batman in Warframe. Unfortunately, because we have things like bullet jumping, the ability to use Rip Line as a movement skill is largely useless. And as far as pulling enemies, all this really does is pull them out of your line of sight, making them harder to kill. It will do a small amount of slash damage, which can be used to kill mid-tier enemies. However, it's not going to scale well, and getting it to target specific individual enemies can be difficult. Now, the augment for this ability, Swing Line, allows Valkyr to cast Rip Line an additional 4 times while in the air after the initial cast, meaning that basically you're a little more energy efficient while casting Rip Line. So if you're using it a lot, this augment could be okay for you, but overall I wouldn't recommend it. Alright, so now let's talk about Valkyr's better abilities. Valkyr's 2, Warcry, increases both allies' attack speed as well as their armor, and in addition it also slows the enemies down. These bonuses are affected by ability strength. Warcry is probably Valkyr's best ability, giving both damage in the form of attack speed as well as additional survivability with armor. And allies only need to be in range for your initial cast. While your Warcry is active, no matter where your teammates are, they will continue to receive the buff so long as they were in range for your first cast. This is important to know when talking about the augment for this ability, Eternal War. Eternal War is probably Valkyr's best augment because it increases your Warcry's duration for 2 seconds every time you get a melee kill. This applies for both melee weapons and your Exalted weapon. And with this augment, you can maintain permanent uptime on your Warcry. Now, her third ability, Paralysis, causes Valkyr to drain 33% of her current shields and deal moderate damage to enemies around her while stunning them. The damage from this ability is not that great, but the stun can be useful for dealing with tough enemies, especially because it can open them to finishers, which deal tons of damage. The augment for this ability, Prolonged Paralysis, increases the duration of the stun and pulls enemies toward Valkyr. This is nice if you're meleeing enemies and you just want to suck them all in. The increased duration is also quite nice. Overall, I wouldn't really recommend the augment in most situations, simply because it relies on ability range, and most Valkyr builds don't go for that. But it's definitely not the worst. And finally, we come to Valkyr's signature ability, her Hysteria. When you activate Hysteria, Valkyr pulls out a pair of claws and becomes immune to all damage and status effects. These attacks have 50% crit chance and 200% crit multiplier. And they also grant Valkyr 5% lifesteal at max rank. As Hysteria is active, you'll see a percent counter in the bottom right hand corner of the screen over the ability. As this percent increases, so does the energy drain of the skill. This energy drain is affected both by duration and efficiency. Upon the activation of Hysteria, you'll see a circle around your warframe the color of your energy. This circle constantly expands while Hysteria is activated. Killing enemies decreases the size of the circle. Now, why is this important? If you look in the top right corner of the screen, while Hysteria is activated, you'll see a damage counter. This damage is stored up when Valkyr takes damage while Hysteria is active. Upon deactivating Hysteria, if there are enemies that are both in your circle and in line of sight of Valkyr, you will take 25% of the total damage in the top right corner. Meaning that while Valkyr is immune to damage during Hysteria, exiting the ability can prove fatal if there are enemies within your range. This can be avoided by doing things like hiding behind pillars or walls upon deactivation, or by simply killing all the enemies around you, causing the circle to both shrink and giving you space to deactivate Hysteria. Now, Hysteria's augment, Hysterical Assault, allows Valkyr to jump onto targets. This is affected by ability range. Because of that, I don't think it's very good, because again, most Valkyr builds are not going to be going for large ability range, making your jump distance fairly short. But it is another way to increase the maneuverability of Valkyr. That's going to do it for the ability section of the video. I'm definitely not able to cover every detail of a Warframe's abilities in one video, so if you guys want to learn more, please do check the links in the description for more information about Valkyr's abilities. Also, for this video, I've chosen to go over the augments for each ability, even though I'm not using most of them in my builds. Please let me know if you guys want me to continue to go over the less powerful augments in future videos to give a better understanding of the abilities as a whole. But now that we're done with that, let's move on to my Valkyr builds. The first build I'm going to go over is my Hysteria build. Now, before I even go into this, I want to be very clear about channeled abilities in Warframe. So in my previous videos, I've kind of skirted over channeled abilities by saying I've gone for maximum efficiency. Now, to actually have the least amount of energy drain possible for a channeled ability, what you need is 175% efficiency and at least 100% duration. If you go below 100% duration, it's going to increase your channeling cost. Meaning that if you have something like 95% duration, which I showed in my Titania video, it's going to be slightly higher than if you had 100% duration and 175% efficiency. Now, to achieve 175% efficiency, you don't actually need max rank efficiency mods. If you don't have any efficiency drains like Blind Rage, then running a rank 4 Fleeting Expertise and a rank 4 Streamline are the only mods required to gain maximum efficiency. So if you look at the left side of my screen with my efficiency, even if I put a max rank Fleeting Expertise in this slot, my efficiency remains at 175%. It won't go higher than that, meaning that you can use a rank lower Fleeting Expertise to gain an additional 10% duration for a build you're using it on. Alright, I just wanted to make that very clear, so I'm giving you guys the most accurate information possible about the concepts behind these builds so that you guys can use them in your own. Now, this is my Hysteria build. So for this, I've gone for max efficiency with positive duration and positive ability strength. For this, my priority is to remain in Hysteria as long as possible. And because of that, I'm using Fleeting Expertise, Streamline, and Primed Flow. To give myself positive duration, I'm also using Narrow-Minded. And for survivability, while my Hysteria is not active because it's going to be hard to maintain 100% uptime on Hysteria, I'm using both Vitality and Steel Fiber. So here I've gone for Transient Fortitude and Energy Conversion to give myself a little bit of ability strength. And because I'm running Narrow-Minded, I can run Transient Fortitude, which decreases my duration, while keeping it above 100%. And in case you don't know how Energy Conversion works, when you pick up an Energy Orb, you gain a buff that looks like this, where on your next cast, you basically have an additional 50% ability strength. So on this build, when I cast Hysteria with Energy Conversion up, it's essentially like me having 220 ability strength instead of 170 that I currently have. The other thing I want to talk about is my range. So for this, I'm not going to have good range on either my Warcry or my Paralysis. So it's just good to be aware of that while playing. For my auras here, I've gone for Corrosive Projection and Power Drift. Power Drift gives me a little bit of ability strength, and Corrosive Projection is just good because it removes armor. Instead of Corrosive Projection, I'd recommend using Steel Charge over Growing Power, because Steel Charge is going to give you more Hysteria damage than Growing Power will. Plus, Steel Charge also gives you more capacity, making it pretty good. And as for my Arcanes here, I'm using Arcane Strike and Arcane Fury. If you were going to replace one of these Arcanes, I'd recommend replacing Arcane Strike with something like Arcane Energize, which would allow you to maintain Hysteria better by giving you more energy while it's up. And for me personally, I prefer having more melee damage than melee attack speed. Now, the second build I'm using here is an Eternal War build, which is the augment for Valkyr's Warcry. This build is not meant to maintain Hysteria uptime. So for this, I'm running both Streamline and Fleeting Expertise, and again, I'm using Narrow-Minded to maintain over 100% duration, with both Transient Fortitude and Blind Rage for ability strength. And again, I have Vitality and Steel Fiber for survivability. This setup is meant for you to use a melee weapon instead of your Hysteria Claws, with the Eternal War augment and keeping 100% uptime on that. And I'll talk more about my thoughts for this during the gameplay section, but this is by far my favorite Valkyr build. Mostly because I think it's the most effective at both taking out enemies and keeping you alive. Now for my auras here, I'm going with, again, Corrosive Projection because I have a dash polarity. You can again swap this out for Steel Charge if you want, and here I'm running Coaction Drift over Power Drift just to strip more armor, considering I already have more than enough ability strength, but these are kind of up to you. And for my Arcanes here, I'm going with Arcane Fury and Arcane Guardian. I'm not entirely sure if a procced Arcane Guardian will also apply to Eternal War. If somebody knows for sure, please do leave a comment and let me know, because I'm curious how this interaction works. Instead of Arcane Guardian, you can again use Arcane Strike or an Arcane Energize to help you maintain energy. But for this build, I'm not using Primed Flow, so it's not necessarily as good, meaning there's less energy to store up. Alright, now that we've talked about my Valkyr builds, let's talk about my Talons build. I'm going for damage and crit. Those are basically the only two things I'm worried about. Because of that, I've chosen Pressure Point with Spoiled Strike for increased damage, Berserker for more attack speed, and then Organ Shatter with Sacrificial Steel for crit. If you don't have Sacrificial Steel, you can also use True Steel. I'm just using Sacrificial Steel because I have the capacity and it gives me more crit chance. As for Elemental, you can use whatever combination you want. Here I'm using Fever Strike and Shocking Touch to create Corrosive, and because I have Prime Fever Strike, it's going to do more damage than if I had another 90% Elemental mod. And last but not least, I'm using Drifting Contact to give me combo duration. You might notice I have no range mods in this build, and that's because the range on Valkyr's Talons is actual garbage. You're going to get almost no value from putting a range mod on your Talons. But I found this setup to be best for my own playstyle, but you could also use a Condition Overload build with dual status mods if you want. I think that about covers it for my mod builds. If you have any questions about these builds, please let me know in the comments, and don't be afraid to try out different combinations for yourself. Alright, so to showcase the gameplay for these two builds, I've queued up for Elite Sanctuary Onslaught. The first build is going to be the Hysteria build. Both of these examples are going to be without arcanes, simply because I'm not sure what people are going to have and I want to show realistic gameplay. Maintaining Hysteria without Arcane Energize can be fairly difficult. Here I'm using the Zenoric Focus School, and while recording this footage, I ran out of energy a few times. If you're running a Hysteria build, and you're not an ESO, I'd recommend running Energy Restore Pads to maintain your energy. But this is still not as effective as running an Arcane Energize, where you can passively maintain your energy by just picking up orbs. I think this Hysteria gameplay really shows why I don't like to use Valkyr's Exalted Weapon over a regular melee. And that's simply because her Exalted Weapon has absolutely no range, meaning that you have to basically be inside the enemies in order to damage them, which not only feels bad to play, but you're so much less effective than using other melee weapons. In the footage I'm about to show with my Atterax, you'll see the vast difference between killing one enemy at a time and simply slide attacking to kill many. But I will say her Hysteria is very effective at taking out tanky enemies by using its finisher combos, which I showed a little earlier in the video. All you need is one charged melee attack to put an enemy in a finisher position. Hysteria's lifesteal is also very good at maintaining your health, which is its main use in my Eternal War build. If you don't have access to some of the more advanced melee mods, or you're a new player, Valkyr's a great warframe to help you tackle harder content. It's just a little less effective once you have access to more gear. Now the second build I'm going to look at is my Eternal War build. And this build focuses on using a melee weapon to maintain your Warcry. With the Eternal War augment, like I mentioned earlier, you gain 2 seconds on your Warcry every time you kill an enemy with a melee. This means you can have permanent uptime on both your armor bonus and your attack speed bonus. And as long as your teammates were within range when you cast the ability, they will have the buff as well. Trust me, if you're maintaining this buff, your teammates are going to like you. But I hope this has given you a good idea of how Valkyr works and what's effective on her. My favorite build is definitely the Eternal War build, but I'm curious what you guys enjoy the most. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, I'd appreciate it if you leave a like and subscribe for future content.